What really happened when World War I began? The outbreak of World War I in 1914 is often remembered as a sudden eruption of global conflict. But the reality was far more complex and deeply rooted in decades of political tension, alliances, and social unrest. Understanding what really happened requires examining not only the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, but also the web of rivalries, miscalculations, and military strategies that transformed Europe into a continent engulfed in war. In the early 20th century, Europe was a powder keg. Nationalism surged across multiple empires, particularly in the Balkans, where ethnic groups sought independence from Austria-Hungary. Industrialization had created unprecedented military and economic capacity, but it also fueled competition for resources and global influence. At the same time, alliances formed between major powers created a fragile balance, which historians often refer to as a tinderbox system. These alliances meant that a conflict involving one nation could quickly escalate to involve multiple others. On June 28, 1914, the spark arrived. Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, visited Sarajevo in Bosnia, a region with strong nationalist sentiments. Gavrilo Princip, a Bosnian Serb nationalist affiliated with the secret organization known as the Black Hand, assassinated the Archduke and his wife, Sophie. While this event might have been contained as a regional incident, the political environment surrounding it ensured that it would become the trigger for a much larger conflict. Austria-Hungary saw the assassination as a direct challenge to its authority and an opportunity to crush nationalist movements in the Balkans. However, it faced a dilemma. Acting aggressively could provoke Russia, which positioned itself as the protector of Slavic peoples in the region. To secure its position, Austria-Hungary sought the backing of Germany, which issued a blank check, pledging unconditional support for any action taken. This assurance emboldened Austria-Hungary to confront Serbia with an ultimatum that included demands virtually impossible to accept without surrendering sovereignty. Serbia responded with partial compliance, hoping to avoid conflict, but Austria-Hungary declared war on July 28, 1914. Russia began mobilizing its army to defend Serbia, setting in motion a chain reaction that escalated beyond anyone's control. Germany, allied with Austria-Hungary, issued ultimatums to Russia and France, while preparing its military strategy, the Schlieffen Plan, which aimed to quickly defeat France before turning to face Russia. The plan relied on rapid movement through Belgium, a neutral nation, which brought Britain into the conflict after Germany violated Belgian neutrality. It is often assumed that leaders intended to plunge Europe into a prolonged war, but evidence suggests that many believed it would be short and decisive. Generals and politicians anticipated limited campaigns, often underestimating the mobilization capacity and determination of their enemies. Miscommunication, overconfidence, and nationalistic fervor accelerated the slide into all-out war. Once armies began moving, political options became constrained. Decisions were locked in by military timetables, leaving little room for diplomacy to reverse the escalation. The opening weeks of the war were marked by rapid movement and uncertainty. Germany invaded Belgium and Luxembourg to outflank France, while Russian forces advanced into East Prussia. Battles occurred almost immediately, with massive casualties on both sides. Soldiers, many of whom had been trained for war but not prepared for its modern scale of destruction, were thrown into the trenches. The war quickly became mechanized and industrialized, featuring machine guns, artillery, and later chemical weapons. What had begun as a localized political crisis turned into a global conflict within weeks. One of the most shocking aspects of the war's outbreak was how quickly it drew in colonies and overseas territories. European empires mobilized resources and troops from Africa, Asia, and Oceania to support their metropolitan powers. India, Australia, Canada, and many African colonies sent soldiers and supplies to Europe. The conflict was no longer merely a European struggle. It became a world war before the term was even widely used. While military operations dominated the headlines, social and political life at home also transformed. Governments imposed strict censorship, rationing, and propaganda campaigns to maintain public support. Nationalistic sentiment surged, pressuring citizens to enlist and support the war effort. Women entered the workforce in unprecedented numbers, managing factories and services left vacant by men at the front. The war reshaped society as profoundly as it reshaped borders. The opening months also revealed the deadly nature of modern warfare. Traditional tactics were ill-suited to new technology. Cavalry charges were decimated by machine guns. Infantry assaults fell to artillery bombardments. Disease and exhaustion ravaged armies. The optimism that leaders had initially held, that war would be short, was rapidly dispelled. By the end of 1914, Europe had settled into a grueling stalemate, particularly along the Western Front, where trenches stretched for hundreds of miles. The initial rapid movements had given way to static, attritional warfare that would define much of the conflict. It is important to recognize that World War I did not erupt by accident. While the assassination of Franz Ferdinand provided the immediate catalyst, decades of militarization, nationalism, imperial competition, and interlocking alliances created an environment in which a local incident could escalate uncontrollably. Leaders believed that rapid action and decisive military campaigns would secure advantages, but the reality proved far more devastating. The war's outbreak also highlighted the limits of diplomacy. Although efforts were made to negotiate and mediate, communication between capitals was slow and often colored by suspicion. Mobilization plans, once set in motion, became virtually irreversible. Each nation felt compelled to act, believing that delay would mean strategic disadvantage or even national humiliation. In this sense, the war began not only because of politics and assassination, but because of a structural rigidity that left little room for peaceful resolution once crisis struck. By the end of 1914, Europe was entrenched in a war that would last 4 more years, cost millions of lives, and redraw the political map of the continent. Monarchies fell, empires crumbled, and societies were transformed forever. What began with a single act in Sarajevo had grown into a global catastrophe, fueled by fear, ambition, miscalculation, and a chain of alliances that none of the participants could fully control. Understanding what really happened when World War I began reveals that history is rarely the result of a single event or decision. It is a convergence of long-standing tensions, human ambition, technological change, and structural vulnerabilities. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand was the spark, but the war was ignited by the combustible forces that had been building for decades. The outbreak of World War I stands as a powerful lesson about the consequences of militarism, rigid alliances, and underestimating the complexity of international relations. It reminds us that even seemingly localized crises can cascade into global conflict, particularly when leaders prioritize short-term advantage over negotiation, and when societies are caught in systems they cannot easily control. In the end, the story of how World War I began is not just about guns and declarations of war. It is about human decision-making under pressure, the unpredictability of alliances, and the ways in which societies can be swept into catastrophe by forces larger than any individual. The assassination in Sarajevo may have been the trigger, but it was the accumulated pressures, calculations, and misjudgments of decades that made the war not only possible, but nearly inevitable. The war's beginning reminds us that history is never simple, and that every conflict has roots that extend far beyond the visible events that first capture public attention. By examining the deeper causes of World War I, we gain insight into the fragility of peace and the enduring importance of diplomacy, foresight, and caution in the face of tension, a lesson that resonates as strongly today as it did over a century ago.